Everything is about to change for the Pittsburgh Penguins as a new report from an NHL insider has revealed Kyle Dubas' plans to speed up this retooling. And one of the players that has been named and is available will shock Penguins fans. We're going to break that all down in this episode of Penguins Digest. But before we do that, a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. About 68% of you who watch these videos are not subscribed to the channel. So if you want to stay up to date with everything that's happening with your Pittsburgh Penguins, this is the place to be for all your daily Pittsburgh Penguins content. So go down below, hit that free subscribe button. And again, this is the place to be for all your daily Pittsburgh Penguins news. Now, let's jump right into it, Mark. There's a lot to get to today and some insight into Kyle Dubas' plans. There is a player that's available that I think could interest some Penguins fans. It's an interesting one. We're going to dive into it, but let's start with this. We also have some draft stuff to get into, but let's start with this. And it is a new report from Pierre LeBrun, and he said that the Pittsburgh Penguins are the only true seller right now, which I think is pretty nuts considering the New York Rangers and some other teams are saying that there is a fire sale going on. But it sounds like the Penguins are one of the only true sellers on the market right now, making calls and fielding calls at the bottom of the standings, are looking to add to get better. So obviously Kyle Dubas, and we'll get to it in a bit as well, has said that this is now the execution phase of the retooling, the rebuild, whatever you want to call it at this point, and that they want to start getting better. So if they are indeed sellers and they want to get younger and they want to get better, is there anybody on this roster that you think, because I have some thoughts, but I don't know if it's actually going to happen, but on this roster that you think that they could look to trade ahead of next season, this offseason, that then they could somehow get better heading into next season?
I mean, the big thing in looking at the list, on the right side, Brian Russ and Raquel are two guys that, listen, played amazing last season. We've seen them really excel, having career years. But this is at the point where their value's at an all-time high. They're getting into their mid-30s. So I think this is the proper approach. You move on from two guys that, yes, it sucks moving on. Both of them played great. But I think you can really gauge the value on these guys after the season. You can almost go out and gouge a team of draft picks, maybe young players. And I do think, as much as it sucks moving on from the vets, I think now is the time to sell on these guys. Get a couple of young guys that can help with not only in a year or two, but also in the years to come. So in my opinion, Darius, I think two of these guys are the players that most teams are going to call on. And if I'm Kyle Dubas, I don't hesitate on moving either of them.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because when you ask, fans of other teams and some Penguins fans, I'm sure they'll tell you the usual suspects. Maybe we should start looking at trading Malkin. Don't think that's very likely. Even Letang or Karlsson, feel like that's going to be very hard to move them. And if you do, who is going to play for this team? That is the other question you have to answer, right? But you bring up a good point. And Rust, obviously, don't think he's going anywhere because of the contract that he has and the structure of his contract. And I think he wants to stay here and he wants to play with Sidney Crosby. I mean, who wouldn't at this point? And obviously, Rickard Rakell, you bring up a good point. Like, I feel like a team like the Toronto Maple Leafs, there's a couple other teams around the league that could use a player like this. Obviously, I don't know if Kyle Dubas wants to trade with the Maple Leafs specifically, but again, a lot of other teams that could use a player like this. His value has never been higher. He had a career year on the Penguins last year. Maybe you look at moving out $5 million, you get some assets in return, you can flip them for something else, or obviously draft, develop, and then you're on your way. But I think that the Penguins want to compete. So it's a very interesting report that they are the only true seller right now, but I don't think it's to get draft picks or anything like that and hold them, I should say. I feel like they want to start flipping these assets to start building out the team. And of course, they have a bunch of young talent as well. The other interesting thing that I thought was pretty crazy in terms of reports the last couple of days, and this is from Chell Penguins. It sounds like the Penguins, and this is multiple reports, different insiders have this as well, they're serious on moving up in the draft. So obviously, they have the pick that they have. They have a ton of draft picks over the next couple of years as well. And it sounds like they want to, again, they're in the execution phase. They want to bundle some of these assets together to then move up in the draft. They want somebody who's closer to being in the NHL. We mentioned this in another video, who has some size, has some speed. Could you see them moving up into a top 5? Because again, if you're moving up in this year's draft to go up to 7 or 8, like, I just don't know if that's really worth it, and if you're going to get a guy that will make the NHL much faster. Do you think this is even worth it in this year's draft, or would you bundle pieces together to go out and get a guy who can play in the NHL immediately? Because for me, you have to go and trade into the top 5 to get a guy like Porter Martone, who's mentioned in this tweet, or else it just doesn't make any sense to me.
I mean, the big thing is, I don't think picks 1 or 2. We know the Sharks, we know the Islanders. They want to take Misa and Schaefer. These guys are bona fide stars, and they're not going to move this. But moving further down, you have the Mammoth, you have Nashville. These are the teams that I could see do it. Chicago's very wary. I think they're very dead set on taking someone. So if they're going to look at this, I think you need to move it for either 4 or 5. And Nashville's a very interesting. We know the reports coming from the Mammoth as well. They want to get better. They want to start competing. But the big thing with Nashville, we know they give a boatload of money to people. We've seen them last offseason playing like a franchise mode in NHL. They were signing everyone, making this team better. Didn't compete, and I think that's where it gets interesting. With the Raquel type, we've seen him have a career year. You can move on from Raquel. You have to move your first. You probably have to move more assets. But if they do truly want to move into this top 5, which I don't know if I fully agree with, but if you are dead set on taking someone like Martone up there, Hagens, one of these players, and you want to move up, I think you're going to have to move on from key guys, and I think it's either going to be the Mammoth or Nashville at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think those are both pretty good options. But again, some of the reports that are coming out are just a little confusing. They want to move up, but they don't want to take somebody who doesn't have size. So for me, if you're looking at, the top 5, it would be Martone. They've obviously taken out a few players as well, including Roger McQueen, which is one of the best names in the entire draft this year. So I just wanted to shout that out. But they're looking for size in round 1. So if they're moving up, it doesn't really make sense to go for somebody who's smaller, but obviously smaller skilled forwards that have that speed has worked for the Pittsburgh Penguins in the past as well. So something to keep in mind. Thought that was pretty interesting. And again, just moving into the draft, this is kind of what we're looking at. Again, shout out to Chell Penguins for this. Dubas wants to trade up in the draft. He wants to start bundling assets together to not only move up and make moves like this, but maybe acquire players who can make an impact at the NHL level immediately. Dubas likes Eklund, Martone, and McQueen. So obviously very ranging there. Like, you might get McQueen with your current draft pick. If you want Martone, you're probably going to have to trade up. So that's going to be interesting to really keep an eye on. Dan Muse sounds like a younger Sullivan for a lot of fans, which I think is very encouraging with his comments the other day. We'll get into that in a second too. And obviously a bunch of other stuff that's going on, like Lemieux possibly buying back the Penguins, which I think is a huge story. We're going to cover that as it continues on the channel here. So, and they're the only team that seems to be selling. So pretty interesting stuff. And I wanted to get into this. Obviously, Chell Penguins is saying that it screams like Rossi, Byram, or Clark, because there's a lot of different RFAs on the market right now. Not necessarily on the market, but just the names are out there. And that Dubas is in the execution phase. So could you see the Penguins looking completely different next year? We've talked about Raquel maybe being out the door, right? Could they go out and then add to the left side? Bowen Byram's a name out there that we haven't really linked. There's another name I want to get to as well that could help the Pittsburgh Penguins, in terms of forwards, but they would have to go out and offer sheet. Doesn't sound like Dubas wants to do that, but again, there is avenues for trades. So, how do you feel about all of this?
I mean, the big thing is, I think Byram makes total sense. You bring in someone on the left side that can compete right away. We've seen him have a bit of an injury woes to start his career, but this is a guy that at one point was playing 20-plus minutes in the Stanley Cup, winning the Stanley Cup Finals, going to Buffalo. His career went down a little bit, let's be honest here. But Brandon Montour did the same. We've seen how well he went when he went to Florida, so I think there is a bounce-back candidate. I don't know if Rossi makes sense. If Dubas wants to get bigger, a 5'9" frame, even though Rossi doesn't play super small, he is still a small frame. But overall, I don't know if this is going to be a complete overhaul of the team. I think the key guys, Malkin, Crosby, Letang, Karlsson, are still going to be here. But I think a lot of these second option guys in Raquel and Russ, and not taking anything away from them, just not star talent, I think a lot of these guys are going to be moved out. And we're going to see a new wave of players coming in. So maybe like a 30% overall of the team, but I don't think it's going to be a total shakeout.
Yeah, I really don't think it can be, right? And the one other player I wanted to bring up is, and his name's out there, not necessarily directly linked to the Pittsburgh Penguins, but it's somebody that they could afford if they wanted to. Again, we're talking about this execution phase. If Dubas wanted to go out and make a splash, you can. You can afford certain players. It just depends if you want to commit to 7 years on this deal specifically, and that's Alexis Lafreniere from the New York Rangers. Now, how do you feel about that? He makes $7.4 million for the next 7 years. He just signed a contract extension. Doesn't necessarily sound like the Rangers are too pleased with his play, and they're not entirely sure if they want to go into next season with him. So how do you feel about that? This is a player that played under Dan Muse as well, so I think that that's very interesting. How do you feel about Alexis Lafreniere? Because I don't know if it makes too much sense, but he is a younger player who has, they've seen some sparks in him in New York. He could be that guy. So how do you feel about that one?
I think it's a very high risk, a very high reward, though. And if anyone in the NHL is going to get the best out of a winger, to put him back into his group, get him to what he was doing in the juniors, I think it's going to be Sidney Crosby. Listen, the $7 million contract for 7 years is not intriguing. You're looking at a contract that's going to be a high risk, but I do think if you can buy low on Laugh, bring him into this team, if he turns it around, I mean, you can always flip him. If not, you're stuck with a contract. So, in my opinion, I think you stay away from it unless it's a very buy low candidate, because there is a high upside on this, Darius.
Yeah, there is, I think, a lot of upside in terms of acquiring Alexis Lafreniere, but you got to weigh your options, right? Do you want to commit that much money to that player when you have a bunch of flexibility and you can make some other moves? And obviously, free agency next year is going to be pretty crazy, right? So there's a lot of big names that are available heading into next season. So do wonder about a couple of those names, but we want to hear what you have to say in the comments about Kyle Dubas, his plan, the fact that there's sellers. Who would you like to see moved out? Who would you like to see moved in? Because it sounds like Dubas doesn't only want to move up in the draft. He wants to acquire some players that can actually make a difference and start building up this team. So it's going to be an interesting next couple of weeks. Let us know how you feel in the comments. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with everything Pittsburgh Penguins.